go back to powder. That's what I'm saying. They're switching from there's even that. It's just expensive. It's just twice. Oh my God. Right. And doesn't matter.
I had one that was brown, so it matched this one.
Calls to order. Is a rule, there'll be no disparaging comments about the mayor. I know it was, before he got on the phone, it was really hilarious, but now that he's called in, we'll make sure that there's no disparaging comments. So, we have a council workshop, and we have the roll call, please.
Councilmember Yonker.
Here?
Councilmember Higginson.
Here.
Councilmember Hess.
Present.
Councilmember Guy.
Here.
Councilmember Hustis.
Here.
Vice Mayor Goodman.
Present.
Mayor Orsborn.
I'm present.
Are you sure? Sounded a bit hesitant.
Sounded like a question.
Okay, so workshop items. Item 2A, staff will present information on the Community Development Block Grant Program, the process for becoming an entitlement community grantee, and options and recommendations for future participation in the CDBG program. We have about an hour set aside for this, and Mr. Craig, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vice Mayor, Mayor, and Council. It's our pleasure to be here this evening. Sitting with me is Andrea Marquez, Senior Planner for Special Projects. We have a pretty short presentation for you tonight, plenty of time for questions and dialogue. There's a couple paths that we have an opportunity to explore over the next few years, and we have ample time to make that decision. This is the flow of the presentation tonight. Just a little bit about CDBG 101, Community Development Block Grant 101, some participation models that are available to us as a municipality. Talk a little bit about the successes we've had with the Buckeye program and some recent project funding we were able to achieve. And then we'll get to the meat of the presentation on staff's recommendation for where we go from here with CDBG and what that process and timeline would look like. So as promised, a little bit about CDBG. It was established as a federal program in 1974. The first allocation in Maricopa County began in 1986. You've probably heard of this program. You've heard of terms like slum and blight, but really CDBG is intended to help communities maintain and enhance the living environment, the infrastructure, housing conditions, but also expand economic opportunities for low and moderate income households and individuals. Some of the projects could include public services and infrastructure improvements in qualifying areas, not just related to housing in particular. And then distinguishing between a couple participation models, we use the term from the federal government of entitlement versus non-entitlement. I will give you a sneak preview. Right now, Buckeye participates in the non-entitlement category. That allows communities to leverage the resources, staffing, and administration of the counties or the participation group. So we are currently in a 3-year participation agreement in an urban county non-entitlement with Maricopa County to administer for our program. In a couple of slides, I'll show you the other communities in Maricopa County that participate in that same non-entitlement process. Through this process, and you'll see a graphic again in a couple of slides of it's not a guarantee each year that you get projects or funding awarded to your community. You are required to submit proposals through a competitive process. We have members of the council that participate on what's called the CDAT committee, Community Development Advisory Committee, that helps select the winning and awarded programs that year. But the benefits may be that you're not required to undergo the public process of developing your own local plan or policies, and a lot of the reporting requirements, including environmental collection, surveys, those things are completed by county staff. There are some minimal local requirements that you have in your jurisdiction, such as collection of wage information, that's the Davis-Bacon wage law, and then aligning your project within your CIP program to make sure it's funded and can be properly appropriated. In an entitlement community, and there's several communities in the valley that take advantage of this opportunity, the HUD Housing and Urban Development Office will provide a letter offering your community participation as an entitlement community. So again, it's not a guaranteed amount because it's a federal program that receives allocation from congressional appropriations, but it does allow you to have a consistent stream of revenue each year to fund your CDBG program. You are required to do the things you weren't required under non-entitlement status, such as developing a 5-year plan, an annual action plan, and your local CDBG policy plan. There are some reporting requirements, and I will tell you what, consolidated annual performance evaluation report. So how well you're doing at administering your funds, that's a requirement that's also part of that. And then what can be costly as far as undergoing some projects is that environmental reviews, phase 1 analysis for a site, those sorts of things become part of the responsibility under entitlement. So in Buckeye in particular, we've had a lot of successes, received over $11 million in our program history. We've been participating in the non-entitlement camp ever since our inception into the program in 1978. So here's some of those projects that we received funding in those categories are listed on the screen for you there. Most recently, the senior center renovation, that was $600,000 and some change we received for the senior center expansion and remodel. So there's some successes. Again, this table may be illustrating for you the communities that are also in the non-entitlement status through Maricopa County. This is the recent award year, so total is just over $2.2 million, and this is how it's allocated in this cycle. We were a big recipient at $605,000. That's for 10th Street Alley and paving improvements here in the downtown area to really improve access for our residents and access to services, but also the paving the alleys, remove those from being unpaved surfaces. A couple other big award winners there, $1 million for Youngtown, Wickenburg at $400K. So you can tell there's some communities that end up with no funding in an award year. In this case, more than half the applicants or participants, not everyone submits an application. They may not have qualifying tracks, such as Litchfield Park in particular, but a lot of these communities receive zero in any given year.
Why is Morristown Water Company on there?
So you want to take that one? Andrew's going to address that one. Why is Morristown Water Company included?
They're actually part of one of the districts under Maricopa County, so they were eligible to submit an application.
They're an eligible entity.
Nonprofit organizations are also allowed to submit under Maricopa County as well. Which at this time, there's an allocation of 20%. They go to social services that they automatically just take that funding and provide to that nonprofit organization.
Okay.
So on the other side of the equation, communities in the valley that are entitlement cities. One thing to point out on this slide, the calculation of the formula for what the allocation amount is each year is not solely based on population. There's a lot of factors, including the deterioration of housing stock, the status of the infrastructure in your community, but also how many areas in your community census tracts that qualify as low to moderate income tracts. So Glendale kind of stands out there. They were awarded in this most recent cycle a little over $2 million to allocate towards their CDBG projects, but even some of the larger communities, Goodyear, for example, they're still in that modest $400K. As you'll see on an upcoming slide, we do have an estimate of what Buckeye could be awarded if we become an entitlement community, and it's right in that range with Avondale and Goodyear. This gives you a sampling of what these communities can count on pretty reliably year to year as far as an allocation being entitlement. entitlement city. So let me set the stage with this slide. So this is a look back, as opposed to the next slide, we're going to take a look forward from this year as an estimate. But essentially, beginning in 2017, that was the first offer year we received an estimated amount for an award, and that came in at $689,000 was the estimate in that award year. Or excuse me, 230. On the bottom side is what the offer letter from Housing and Urban Development, the HUD office, gave us as far as if you became an entitlement city, we estimate we would award you $230,000. So on the bottom graph there, for those next 3 years of that cycle, we estimated no change. And then in 2020, we received another offer to participate and become an entitlement city, and that was estimated at that $403,000. And then most recently, when we made a decision to continue being an entitlement city, the letter indicated approximately $487,500. So that's the comparison period. You know, it's an odd number to look back over 7 years, but the reason that's selected is we have actual numbers from what HUD believes they would have awarded us. If you look back what we were awarded over that same period with this most recent year, $65,000, the comparison between those 7-year periods, $1.9 million essentially as a non-entitlement community, not having guaranteed funding each year, but having some significant awards sprinkled throughout that period of time, versus more consistent escalating amounts over that period of time if we would have become an entitlement community over that period. So obviously the average is a little bit higher, as we talked about earlier, and then we'll calculate on the next slide, there are some costs to the city to administer a program, so we don't necessarily net that amount, that difference. Let's first look forward. So if we project out a similar award amount on the top table of $620,000 with an award maybe every 3 years, and annual average over a 10-year period in the future could be, with those assumptions, a little less than $250,000 annually. Taking that entitlement offer and not escalating it, being conservative over that 10-year period, recognizing we would receive funding each year as long as Congress continued to fund that program, we would have $200,000 more in annual average. Just a quick table to explain that we would absorb some of those costs that are now being performed by Maricopa County. Estimated that we'd spend $100,000 in environmental review and reporting requirements, and then over time we'd have to update our 5-year plan, our annual action plan, and our policy broken down by year. That we estimate about $15,000. So net annual for projects for construction, design, and management of projects, $372,000 of that award. But all those communities that we showed you on the other slide, we've checked, and they've dedicated at least 1, sometimes 2 staff members to administering the program locally. So if you subtract out the cost of a new employee with salary and benefits, you may net about $252,000 a year in a net value analysis. So that money wouldn't come out of the program award. It would be general fund to provide a full-time employee, but just giving you all the costs and benefits. And if you want to go ahead, Vice Mayor.
Go forward a slide.
Okay.
Right there. So the grant won't allow to absorb the FTE.
You can spend a proportion of your award on administration. I believe it's 20% of your award on administering, so you can put that towards employee costs, but oftentimes that's not enough to fund a full position.
Also, we've been advised that once you start allocating that percentage to actual full-time employees, you have to report that employee. So every time we touch the project, or they're not, you have to report everything that they're doing for the project. So it becomes time consuming.
Yeah.
So
That's
this
where
way,
I was going to go next.
so a better use of that money is that if you have a large project, you can actually allocate, let's say we'll use that $252,000 for the first year just on the design and engineering, because that qualifies. And then for the second year, you can allocate that amount towards the construction of the project. So a better use of the funding.
Is there a required match on this, or would we make up the difference between what the grant is and what the total project costs? would be?
With CDBG, there is not a match requirement through HUD. Also, under our application process with Maricopa County, there is not a match, but it does help strengthen the application process when moving forward. Not necessarily that showing a match, but just showing that we're fiscally responsible. And also, we've learned over time that shovel-ready projects are also were awarded as well.
Thank you.
So before I go to sort of conclusion and wrap up, I just wanted to step back. We figured with a lot of assumptions, obviously, the net value analysis, which is a more confident number because it's a regular amount of money that we'll be receiving every year. $250,000 in net annual benefit, whereas if we are hopeful that we would be awarded this large amount every 3 years under non-entitlement, it comes to be about the same. So I'm not declaring tonight that it's a wash, but it's very similar if the assumptions over that 10-year period follow suit. I think there are some benefits to talk about, however, that essentially it creates the ability for us to have more predictability in our CIP process, a regular stream of revenue to allocate towards projects. One of the examples we were talking about in another meeting today was the need to enhance and improve sidewalks and ADA accessibility in our downtown, especially in some of the more modest income neighborhoods. And that sort of stream of revenue could be programmed out with a consistent amount each year towards that project, whereas we tend to be most successful when we're awarded large projects, and so that timing of receiving that money and expending that money awarded under the non-entitlement process creates a little bit of burden in-house to make sure we have a project that we can put that towards time with when that money and that project would be keyed up in our CIP program. Obviously, there's the costs associated with developing those programs. As you can imagine, a lot of the communities, Goodyear, Avondale, Glendale, they still often use consultants to develop the initial 5-year plan. The annual action plan, once adopted, is a little bit easier to update in-house, maybe some consulting and community outreach. There is a community outreach and public participation process required. And that's one of the reasons we're here tonight, even though our expiration of our current 3-year agreement with Maricopa County is not until 2026. If we choose to move to an entitlement opportunity, and I think I jumped the gun, but it's one of those things that you need to get ahead of so you can have that report in hand, ready to develop, or ready to submit when you're ready to accept, if we choose to do so, the offer to become our own entitlement community. So this lands us here. We can continue to participate under the competitive process with the Urban County Agreement through Maricopa County, which we're one of the bigger communities now left in that list, if you recall back to the list of communities that participate. So that does help bolster that number for the rest of those communities. Our allocation helps support the total money that's allocated each year. If we choose to become an entitlement participant, we see the next few months to years playing out as such. We would bring back a resolution for council to consider approving staff at the direction of the mayor to accept the entitlement offer when it comes and initiating the collection of data required to begin the 5-year plan. Council did approve in the fiscal budget currently some funds for us to go out and begin that process. So we do have funds available in the development services budget to begin a 5-year plan development if we choose to move down that path. And then as we inch towards 2026, which is just around the corner, we'd be readying that plan for submittal to HUD and to accept that delegation of an entitlement community to get that actual funds each year. And then going forward in the future, we would need to make sure we follow the required 3 to 5 year cycle to update our 5-year plan and then our annual action plan. And each year required to have that public outreach process. I think that lands us at the questions. And if I skip through some of the slides with a lot of numbers on it, I apologize, we can always go back. Rest assured, I think when Bill comes in, you're going to see a lot of numbers on his presentation as well. Also, before we begin, Vice Mayor, I want to thank our past CDAC representatives, Mayor Osborne, as well as our current ones, Councilmember Hess and Vice Mayor Goodman, but also in particular Councilmember Guy for her recent service and success in securing a little over $1.2 million over the last few years of her participation on that committee. Thank you.
Thank you, but I really think I have little to do with that.
Just take the credit.
All right, okay, thank you.
Okay, questions? We'll start on my right.
I'm good, thank you. I know from this program from dealing with Andrea in the past, she's really good at getting those programs and getting us those awards, so you do you.
Councilmember Hagestad.
No question.
I have lots of questions.
Okay.
I'm probably the driving force that thinks that we should become our own entitled community. And having served on that board for 8 years, if you bring up the population figures, I mean, yeah, that one. I mean, so we're competing essentially with communities that barely have an engineering department for those kind of projects. So I have become, if you want to get the political sense in the room with those other communities, you become, I don't want to use the word bully in the room, but I mean, they're looking at a community that has many, many, many more resources than they could ever hope to have. Also, the way the committee is structured, there's, if it's a city, there's a city council person appointed that serves on the committee, and then I think there's 5 or 6 representatives from Maricopa County. So you are not allowed to advocate for your city in the voting. You can't even vote for your city's project, and you can't advocate for your city during any of the presentations. So you're pretty much at the will of the rest of the committee members. And we were fortunate this year. I was kind of holding my breath that if we would get funded, but we had a lot going for us in that we were ready, and Andrea has been very careful over the years to make sure that we had shovel-ready projects and that we could complete those projects on time, because prior to her, Buckeye was not known as the best at getting their projects completed. So some of that, we probably will need an additional person, but I think some of that, I mean, obviously a lot of your time is already spent on the way we currently do the CDBG process. And a lot of those fiscal responsibilities, is Bill's not here?
He's hiding in the corner.
Okay.
He is
Oh. I mean, I'm sure some of, am I correct in assuming, I should ask the question the right way, am I correct in assuming that the same kind of reporting we would have to do with the CDAC, we already have to do on many of other projects that we...
I'm sure there's a difference between the federal programs, but overall they're very similar.
Yeah. So I just think I think it's time, and whether it be this 3 years or the next 3 years, we've just evolved to a city, and our population is going to continue to grow. So we kept those funds stagnant, which was smart for this presentation. But as our population grows, I feel like we are going to have more funding. And then we don't have to justify to 10 other communities how we want to spend that money. If we think putting in sidewalks in downtown is the best use of that money, we can do it. We don't have to justify that project rates above sidewalks in Youngtown or a water line in Wickenburg. So it just gives, I just feel like it gives us a little more control. So it might be a wash in the first 2, 3, 4 years, but I think down the line, we'll see a lot more benefit if we're in entitlement.
Thank you, Councilor Guy, well said, and I think your point is well taken on the reporting in particular. I think the knowledge base exists in the city. The position seems to be just somebody that can spearhead and make sure they're responsive to the federal government.
Thank you. Councilmember Eustace.
I was on the committee for a short period of time with Andrea and we went downtown. I really don't have too much to say about it other than the fact to compliment her on the work that she does on this. And to see her at work, it's quite pleasing because she really fights hard for the city of Buckeye to get us the benefits. And I think we were working on sidewalks on one project I was on, and we did get the project funded. So compliments to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember S.
Yeah, I would add Councilmember Guy's comments. I know we looked at this probably 2 or 3 years ago, wondering if we were at that tipping point then, and we didn't, and the gamble paid off. But I do believe we are probably at that time now. Brian, I'm not sure if I missed this or not. When do we have to decide what was that ramp up date again? Could you remind me?
So we have to start delivering some of the responses in 2026, but really we need to hit the ground running in next year with the public outreach process to get that data collected. So we would like to get some direction this fall to move forward and expend the planned dollars we have allocated in our budget.
So this is another kind of odd question. I'm not sure that this is probably not giving any direction, but I do think we can probably go that direction. But if there is, we're seeing some recession indicators, we're seeing some stock market declines. In the event that we start moving into a recession, is there a benefit one way or another, or is there an ability for us to pivot if we give direction now, but then when we see something's changing, do we have that time to pivot right at the beginning of 2025? I guess that's my little caveat, is that I think we should probably look forward with that caveat if we don't go into recession. That factor that we don't quite see right now, would that even be a factor for us? So I don't know that that's probably something we need to answer tonight, but something I just wanted to throw out there, I guess. That's all I have.
Thank you, Councilor. I give you a more definitive answer after tonight, but I think one of the ideas we had was to bring forward a resolution to council to formalize that decision, but we can wait to do that until there's some confidence in what you want to do, and maybe you can even caveat that resolution based on the economic outlook. Really, the acceptance in 2026 is the turning point where you choose to go entitlement versus non-entitlement. But we can always begin the process of the public outreach process, and that'll even if we stay non-entitled, we can use that information to help us internally decide how we want to expend the dollars when they're awarded to us. And lastly on that point, if economic conditions hit the U.S. and the Congress decides to scale back on this program, our prediction is to scale back uniformly. So whether we participate one way or the other, I think we'd feel the same effect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Orborn.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Brian, I'd like to echo Councilmember Hess's question. Can you tell us if there's going to be a recession?
It's not what I signed up for tonight, but I'd sure like to give it a me.
You can let us know tomorrow morning, maybe. That would be great. I know that's not what you asked. I'm just poking fun. Hey, I think it is probably the right time to do this, and maybe a question that even further cements the idea for us as we move forward. And there's increases. If we see an increase in the amount of money that they're putting toward the entitlement cities, we would probably see maybe a percentage of the same increase that we would see in the entitlement cities with the county. Is that a good assumption?
I think the trend line, yes, but again, the factors of the amount of poverty in your community is the biggest weighted factor, but there's also, in addition to population, and how they consider overcrowded units and some other pieces of the formula. But generally, the trend lines will stay similar, yes.
Okay. And as we do get other cities that come on and get a little bit more sophisticated and get in the monies, then we're competing with those other municipalities or the county projects or. So I think from my perspective, it makes complete sense for us to become an entitlement city or work toward becoming that entitlement city. And I think ultimately we're really controlling our own destiny at that point. We're not competing with a bunch of others and trying to develop projects that may or may not be the highest and best use of the funds at that time. I know we have to stick to a 5-year plan, but sometimes they pivot in the county and there's things that are different priorities than maybe what we have scheduled in the plan. I know back when I was doing it, there were a couple of years where they kind of changed and said during the recession they wanted more economic development type projects. And ours were essentially sidewalk and water line replacement and things like that. So it didn't exactly line up with what they were looking for. So I think all that we can control what we will be spending the funding on, and that amount of funding would just grow over time and become an even better benefit to the city of Buckeye as we move forward in future years after 26.
Yes, agreed.
All right, and that's all I have to say about that. Thank you, Vice Mayor.
You're welcome. Councilmember Hagestad?
Yeah, I have one question, and it's really kind of just a thought that we should keep in mind. I know this is grant money in large part, if not incomplete. However, sometimes those in Washington like to attach strings to the money they send to our communities. And what I would like to continue to watch for is strings that change policy for the city. And so I'll just leave it at that much. Any policy decisions should not come based upon the money we want to receive. And if money that we want to receive has strings that we don't like the policy of, council should have the vote on that, whether we take the money or not. If our people want to vote for certain policy changes, or if the council wants to vote for certain policy changes, that's the way this works. But I don't want our policies at the city of Buckeye level to be dictated because we took money. That's all I would like to, everybody keep an eye on that.
Understood. Understanding what strings or conditions may be attached to money we receive.
Thank you.
Heard.
I was actually going to ask that question.
I should have let you.
It really was. I mean, there are lots of grants that I dealt with during my time at the college that it was more onerous to manage the grant than it was the actual dollar value of the grant. So with this, it sounds like we kind of have that balance, but I echo all the comments that have been made so far that this really needs to fit into what we're doing, not change how we're doing things to get this money. But I'm in favor. I think it's time that we move forward and become an entitlement city.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. And one consistent theme I heard was also appreciation for Andrea. I just want to recognize, we also think she's pretty great. So thanks for recognizing her, and definitely share that back in the office.
Good. Any other questions? Thank you. Good discussion. I'm waiting for you to stand up. Item 2B. Thanks, Brian.
Yes, thank you.
Item 2B, presentation and discussion only of the draft land use assumptions, infrastructure improvements plan, and development impact fees. Ryan promised us lots of numbers from you.
Bill, I have
Mr.
that.
Copy.
I'm driving here, Bill.
So, Mr. Cotton, the floor is yours. And there's an expectation of lots of spreadsheets, so.
All right. Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members. So this afternoon, we're going to talk about our proposed impact fees. With me tonight is Ben Griffith with Fisher Vice, and then also as part of our team that regarding the impact fee study is also Brian. So he's going to stay up here and handle all of the tough questions that come up today. So we do have a long report, a lot of slides, a lot of information to go over, so I think we'll just jump right into it if it's okay with council. So here is the overview of the agenda for today. So Ben's going to talk a little bit about some of the basics of impact fees. Then we'll get into the project timeline, land use assumptions, and then we're going to start getting into kind of the meat of the presentation today, as is the impact infrastructure improvement plan, which is all the capital components. And then at the end, where we have most of our information, most of our slides, we're going to talk about the fee summaries, basically the results of what we've come up with so far, various examples of actual permits that are pulled, and then basically comparisons with other cities, so where we are now versus compared to other cities. So with that, I think I'll just turn it over to Ben at this point, and he can go over the next couple slides.
Thanks, Bill. I'm Ben Griffin with Fisher Vice. I've been working with the city on this study and a previous study. So for those of you who haven't worked with impact fees before, this will be a very quick bring you to speed. For those of you that were here when they were adopted late 2019 or early 2020, this can be a quick refresher. But essentially, impact fees are one-time payments for future developments and growth-related capital costs. And so tonight we're looking at what is the maximum justifiable fee related to those capital costs. And so essentially what we're trying to do here is make sure that the fees that we propose are proportionate to demand. So you'll see when we look at those comparisons that a single-family fees can be different than a multifamily fee, and we justify that because a single-family unit is on average going to have more occupants than a multifamily unit. So part of the impact fees, we have to make sure that the fee is proportionate to demand, and so varying trip generation rates, occupancy factors, employment density. That's the way that we ensure that these fees are proportionate, and with impact fees, we also have to make sure that the fee payer receives a benefit. So that's essentially two parts. There can be a geographic benefit. So you'll notice when we go through the slides that we have maps of the service areas. So some are citywide, some are sort of carved out to make sure that that benefit is tied to the fee. And then the other part of the benefit is if someone gives you money for an impact fee, you have to spend it within a timely manner. So in Arizona, you are required to spend that within 10 years of the date of collection. Right, so there are three components to an impact fee study in Arizona. The first two, the land use assumptions and the infrastructure improvements plan, or IIP, those are adopted first. So the land use assumptions, essentially that's going to be your development projections, those proportionate demand factors that I mentioned. The IIP, that's your level of service, the costs associated with that. And then the final component, which is adopted after the land use assumptions in the IIP, would be the actual development fees. So I mentioned the level of service. So one thing we have to make sure of with impact fees is that we don't charge future development for a higher level of service than existing development receives. So you'll hear me mention level of service. If you've looked at the very lengthy report, it shows the level of service for each component. So again, that's just making sure that we define what is provided to existing development to make sure that we're not overcharging future development. And then in Arizona, there are some limitations on what we can include. So we have to limit parks to 30 acres unless they provide a direct benefit. Libraries are limited to 10,000 square feet. And then for public safety, we can't include shared training facilities.
So on this slide, you can see the timeline for our impact fees. So starting at the top left. So we started this process in October 23, and actually it probably was a little bit earlier because we went out for solicitation. And at that point, we hired many firms. So we started that process. We worked with all the various departments, and Miranda's group, Terry with water, Scott with streets, public safety, and we came up with various capital needs that are more growth related. So that took a little bit of time to gather that information. And then what we decided to do was we basically formed a stakeholders group of various community members, multifamily, various individuals that came, and we met on a regular basis. So as information became available, we went ahead, had meetings with the stakeholders group, and we presented that information to them as we went through this months between October and April. We had 4 or 5 meetings with the stakeholder group. During that time, as information became available, we had meetings, got their feedback. We made some small changes. I'm pretty sure they didn't think we made enough changes. I think they would like to see us make a lot more changes, I think, in some of the fees. But we were receptive. I think we were very transparent through the process. I know in one of the meetings, very first meeting, there was questions about our land use assumptions. Brian went back with his staff and Susie. We kind of looked at our growth patterns, our projections, and we felt that those multifamily, those industrial, those could have been modified. So we went ahead based on comments we received from the stakeholders group and made those adjustments into our land use assumptions. So I felt it was very beneficial. I know James is here behind me, and so I hope they all felt that it was very useful meetings. I know we gained a lot from them. The other component is that we also started meeting with master developers. So we met with them many times, talked about the various components of the impact fees. Which component are they going to pay for? Which component do they want to use CFD funding for? So all of that information was done during this October to April time period. So we feel that we have a good report. I know there's probably some changes that still need to be made, but I think we've gathered a lot of information. We presented a lot of information. So now the next steps. So right now we're in August. We did publish our land use assumption and infrastructure improvement plan is on our website. So anybody can go on our website, see all the information that we're provided as it relates to our current impact fees. So today we're having a workshop, and then the bulk of the process starts October at the public hearing. And then you can see there's various timelines and various dates that each of those components fall after the public hearing in October. So we have another slide at the very end to kind of get council's input and thoughts as it relates to our current timeline, but we can address that at the very end.
All right, so the first component of the impact fee study is going to be the land use assumptions. So this is a citywide overview. If you look at the report, there are many service areas where we've broken out the city into multiple components or subcomponents. But this is a summary of the citywide projections. We started off with MAG's most recent data set, and we showed that to the stakeholder group back in October, and as Bill mentioned, we felt like the multifamily number was a little low, so we looked at what is entitled, what's in the development pipeline, and adjusted that projection of multifamily housing units upward. And then for single family, we're still using MAG. It's coming in at a little over 2,100 housing units a year for the 10-year projection. And I think last year you were around 2,200?
Correct.
Yeah, so very similar to what you've seen recently. With the non-residential components, MAG projects employment, and so then we convert it to non-residential floor area using Institute of Transportation Engineers employment density factors. So after that first pass, it looks like the industrial, commercial, and office, those are coming in a little low. So we actually looked at recent permit history and again what's in the development pipeline and adjusted those to reflect more of what you've seen recently. The institutional numbers we're using MAG's employment projections, but essentially here what we're looking at is about 29,500 housing units over the next 10 years and an associated population increase of almost 86,000 people in those housing units.
So where it says single family, and then 2024, 38,782, is that people?
That's the existing single-family housing units.
Rooftops.
Unit.
Rooftops. Yeah.
Okay, so you said 2,100 a year. So how is that added to our current? I'm trying to reconcile 2,100 annually, which is what you said,
Correct.
to 38,000.
Correct. So if you've got about 38,000 today, then
Okay,
in
good.
2034, we're looking
Got
at
it,
about,
okay.
yeah.
All right.
I have a question on that with the rooftops as opposed to the number of people you're factoring into that. Did we, within all this, do take any in consideration of when you talk to some of the developers that are building new houses and stuff, you go in and talk to their sales staff and ask them what houses they're selling, and they tell you that they're selling their smaller homes in the development and they're selling the bigger homes, but then their biggest home is in the development. And that biggest home that's right now, we're seeing a trend of two families buying that house and splitting all the costs. Is that taken into consideration when you talk about the impact fees and the number of people based off that? Because that is a factor, correct?
So what you don't see in the population number, it's essentially a conversion of those additional housing units based on occupancy factors. We're actually using the water and sewer design standards, those occupancy rates, which are extremely similar to the most recent census data. But there's no data to support a two-family, because we're basically talking in averages, and this is looking at the life of that housing unit. So while there may be two families buying it today, in 20 years it may be empty nesters. So we need to talk in averages over the life cycle of that.
So you don't think that trend is going to affect us, what you're saying?
Yeah, in 20 years, it can be the exact opposite.
Can I add to that?
Sure.
So it does factor in the sense that we have an occupancy rate for Buckeye. And Buckeye's occupancy rate actually tends to be a little bit higher than the rest of the valley already, based on what the trends are of people reporting. It's not just the 10-year census, it's the 1 and 2 year annual. The ACS data also gets us a little bit closer to what's on the ground today. So we do this exercise every 5 years, 3 to 5 years, so we will get another chance to see in 5 years, did that number occupancy rate across the city as an average change?
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And I think there's just one more point under employment. I think it's, you can see for the base year 24, we're at 18,000. And then by, 2034, we're at 42. So it's an increase of almost 24,000 jobs over that time period, which is pretty remarkable.
All right, so the infrastructure improvement plan, we're going to talk about each components of fire, police, parks separately, but essentially what we're looking at is the infrastructure costs related to these capital improvements. We're going to allocate them differently. So we're not going to treat a park fee like we would a street fee. So for, some of these categories, residential, we may allocate the fees, per person and convert that into housing units, or we may do it based on vehicle trips. On the non-residential side, we may use, vehicle trip sharing, we may use employment density. And then for utilities, historically, you've used meter size. With this update, we are looking at usage in gallons. And so essentially the methodologies with your non-utility fees are very similar to what they are with your 2019 fees or your current fees. The big change in methodology is related to your water and wastewater fees. So trying to more accurately tie the fees to the demand from high water users.
The other thing I would like to add is, so when we say cost of projects, the last time we did this was 2010, and really the cost of the projects associated back in 2010 were probably based in 2018, 2019. So just over that time period. So as you start seeing the comparisons in the non-residential side, it's almost exclusively related to just the increased cost related to the new infrastructure that's currently proposed within the plan.
All right, so related to the changes in utilities, we still have a fee for a single-family residential unit. That was essentially your base meter size last time, so we still have that separate. We're looking at any of the non-residential meters larger than 1.5 inches, using a different methodology. So instead of using a capacity ratio to say, hey, as you increase in meter size, there is a proportionate increase in demand. We're actually looking at the water master plan demand factors and using those design standards, or if a developer wants to provide their own water study on what they think they would use if it deviates from the master plan, that's also available. But really, we're just trying to get a better relationship between the demand from these high water users and the actual fee that they pay, making sure that they're actually paying their proportionate share. So currently, Goodyear, they use this methodology. They switched to this last year, so their fees went into effect, I think, in April of this year. Phoenix, instead of just using strictly a capacity ratio, they actually apply a non-residential basically upcharge to theirs to account for the additional demand from a similar size non-residential meter compared to a residential meter. So it's a way of trying to better predict demand from these non-residential users. And that's part of the discussion we had early on was, how do we ensure that future development is paying their proportionate share of water and sewer costs? Because we know that costs have increased, and we know that some of these larger or higher water demand users haven't been paying their proportionate share. So it's just trying to ensure that we fix that going forward. But there is always the applicant can always say, hey, we think we're different than what your master plan says. Here's why.
I have a question.
Sure.
We're just talking about future development and what needs to be charged, or what development fees we need to charge in order to recognize these issues. Or are we talking about rates that we need to charge these people?
So the rates would take care, that would be your monthly or annual usage. The impact fees are looking at the actual capital cost.
Just looking at the impact fees. Okay, I just saw your slide here and I wanted to make that clarification. Thank you.
I don't want to jump too far ahead, but as we start showing some of the comparisons with, especially in the water, wastewater side, we have pulled other permits and we're doing comparisons. We are currently using the engineering design standards, which basically indicates the largest, the most water usage. So the fees will be large, but they have options. So that's all we had available at the time. We can run different scenarios. We can definitely do different calculations based on what that facility or what that project is actually going to use. So I just want to kind of stress that one point there, that when we start going through these examples, you're going to see some significant increases between current and proposed.
So you're saying that if, whenever we get to the point that we pass the development fees, that the project still has the ability, if they can demonstrate that they're going to use less, whatever, and then they can pay a reduced amount based on that.
Correct.
All right, so first up we have the fire facilities IIP. So this is all very similar to your existing fees. We have added a new fire facilities component, so that's not fire stations. That is looking at fire facilities that serve the entire city. So right now, in the proposed fees, it's actually looking at your existing fire headquarters and saying, hey, if we want to maintain this level of service, so as we grow, we know we'll need more space to serve these types of functions. What would it cost to do that? For the fire stations, that's essentially why we needed this map with a lot of service areas on it, because you have a few fire stations that because of a development agreement, the developer builds it, and then the city repays that developer through the impact fees. So that would be Festival Ranch, North Star Ranch, and Torteso West. Teravalis or Floreo is on there. They're carved out. There is no station component of their fee because they do plan to construct their fire station outside of the impact fee program. So you'll notice, when we look at the fee comparisons, Teravalis is going to have a lower fee because there is no fire station component since they're not seeking reimbursement. Right, so this shows the proposed fees in the main service area. So essentially, none of the areas that are seeking cost recovery for their station. So all we're doing here is just saying, hey, the cost per person times the average persons per housing unit. That's how we're going to calculate any of the residential fees. On the non-residential side, we take the cost per job, multiply it by the number of jobs per 1,000 square feet, so it gives you a fee or a proposed fee per 1,000 square feet of floor area.
I do want to point out, we've kind of changed some of the terminology a little bit. So under the development type, you can see the low, medium density. In the previous reports, that would be the single family. High density would be multifamily, and then age restricted. That stayed the same, so it's still age restricted. So I just want, there's a little bit of adjustment. So whenever you see this low, medium density, that's really referring to single family homes.
Why is the age restricted lower?
Pardon me?
Why is the age restricted proposed fee lower than like a low or medium? That why aren't they just lumped in together?
They tend to have less persons per household in the 55 plus communities on average. So that's the multiplier for the persons per household.
So it's based on per person rather than perhaps maybe numbers of calls.
Yeah, so on the column right next, so that's that 3.2 is 3.2 persons per unit. So multifamily is 2.5, and then for age restricted, we have two persons per unit. So here's our first slide comparison for just fire. This is a single family. So all of our current illustrations will be single family, and then later in the presentation we'll get into the various other components also. So you can kind of see where the green is what our proposed fee is, and then basically the orangish color is what our current fee. So you can see there's a few, Peoria, Maricopa, Avondale are currently will be having higher fees than us. Peoria's fee just went into effect, so that's a 2024 fee, or going to be, I think, later this year. Avondale was last year, so those are current fees. Some of the other cities like Glendale, Phoenix, they're similar to us. Their fees were adopted in 2020, so they'll be going through some type of rate analysis here soon also. So you can kind of see there's a little bit of a change. It's a 66% increase between what was current and what is proposed as it relates to the fire fee.
Did you say 66%?
66%, yes, sir.
All right, so for police facilities, we'll have a single citywide service area, which is what we have today. We're looking at three components, so facilities, vehicles, and equipment. They're all using an incremental methodology, so just maintaining the existing level of service. This is the same methodology we used last time. And you have a remarkably similar level of service today as you did in the last study. This is a trend that, throughout all the fees, throughout all the non-utility fees, because your level of service is so similar to last time, really it's construction cost increases that are driving your increases to the fees. Again, just taking the cost per person for residential, multiplying that by the occupancy rates to come up with the proposed residential fees. And then on the non-residential side, the cost per vehicle trip multiplied by the average number of trips for 1,000 square feet of the related non-residential fee.
So on this slide, you can kind of see the increase over between proposed and current. So it's just under 100% increase. Again, the components haven't changed, so it's all strictly related to the cost of the current vehicles, equipment, the facilities is the driving factor on this one, as with many of them. So here's our police single-family residential impact fee comparison with other cities. So again, Avondale is higher than us. They're the only city right now that would be slightly higher than us. And then you can see the comparisons with all of the other cities. So again, some of these will be updated, so these fees could change later this year with some of the other cities going through their impact fee studies.
Right, for libraries, sticking with just a library facilities component split north-south, just like your existing fees. So for the proposed fees, again, very similar level of services last time. So really, it's just the construction cost increase that's driving the residential increase. We did vary the split between residential and non-residential a little more towards the residential side this time, which is why you're seeing a slight decrease on some of those non-residential fees.
So on this slide, it shows a comparison again with the other cities, but as you can see, there's a lot fewer cities in the valley that really will charge a library impact fee. And of those cities, we will be the highest. So, and a lot of that's due to some of the limitations that Ben said, that we can only pay up over 10,000 square feet. So a lot of the cities aren't even charging an impact fee because of that. So we're close to a handful of cities right now that do that.
Some of those cities don't even have their own libraries, correct? Is that why they're not even on there? Like Goodyear doesn't have their own libraries, is that correct? I think they're with Maricopa County.
Goodyear, well, to answer that one, Goodyear contracts with the county to run the library, but Goodyear did pay for the library and owns the actual building or facility itself, so they would have been able to have a development impact fee to do it, but it would be limited to 10,000 square feet in size.
All right, so for Parks and Rec, sticking with a north-south split like the existing fees, so we have two components that are assessed citywide. So that would be the regional park amenities. There's no land associated with the regional parks, it's just the amenities. And then the community centers, so those are assessed citywide. And then due to differing levels of service for community parks and pools, that's really the reason we needed two separate service areas. So in the north service area, there is not a pool. So, that is a new component. We're looking at a plan-based because with that, we need to make sure that we treat everyone the same. We don't charge future development for a higher level of service than existing development receives. So by going with a plan-based and spreading the cost over all development in 2034, we can allocate that demand to everyone equally. In the north, we also have a community park amenities component. So in your current fees, community parks in the north, it was just a land component because you were focusing on just getting a site in your current fees. Now that you have that site, the focus has shifted to providing improvements there. In the south service area, we have the community parks and pools, both incremental as your current fees are set up. So really, in the south, just looking at maintaining a level of service, so making sure you incrementally add additional community parks and pools.
So just to clarify, current level of service in this situation is based off of existing services and products? Is that?
Depending on the component. So for example, in the north where there is no level of service for community park amenities or pools, your level of service is 0, but we show a planned level of service and then allocate the cost over all development in the final year of the study. That way, your planned level of service treats everyone the same.
So because we're growing and we're a newer city, you just say, well, they only have 2 libraries right now. They only deserve 2 in the fee structure for the north, for what's existing. And as we grow, you'll be able to be more?
Depending on the methodology. So for libraries specifically, you have to, there's library card data that shows that residents in the north are using your existing libraries. So it's a citywide level of service, but it's 2 separate collection zones. With parks, with that one, sometimes residents aren't willing to travel as far. So the idea here is to, provide those amenities to the north. But it does come at a cost to the city because, again, you can't charge future development a higher level of service. So there is a growth share, but then there's also an existing development share that can't be funded within that piece.
Is that the same measurement for police and fire, or is that based on calls and different data?
So for police and fire, well, for police is easier. It's a citywide service area. So because they can be in a vehicle, it's easier just to say, hey, we're going to use a citywide service area. For fire, outside of the 3 or 4 development agreement service areas that we've carved out, it's just based on, hey, we have this many square feet or we have this many apparatus existing, and then, dividing that proportionately to residential or non-residential development. But with most of those, it's just saying, if this is what we provide today, we just want to maintain that going forward.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, so For the proposed parks fees, on the left we have north, on the right we have south. So you can see that the fees are a little less in the north than the south. And then in the south, we're actually looking at a slight decrease on some of those non-residential proposed fees. And again, that's just a shift based on your existing development. You have a little more residential development than non-residential compared to the last study. So there's just a slight shift more towards residential in this study.
And I guess to add, in our meetings that we've had, not only with the stakeholder group, but with master developers, this is probably the one area that came up the most for discussion, especially in the north. A lot of the master developers will have their own, basically their parks. And so there's a lot of discussion as to related to, why do we have to pay a fee if we already have a park? And really the idea behind that is that we're building a community or a city park where a lot of those developments right now, that is for their development. So they're not, part of our, Miranda can't go up there and make any programs for softball or whatever facilities they might have. So that's why currently there is that north fee, and you can see where that fee has jumped up over 200% over what it was currently. And that's because of those various components, and it really kind of focuses to the amenity component of that, because there are very few amenities, park amenities up in the north region. So this was the area that there was probably a lot of discussion with many individuals. So just to give you a little bit more context related to these fees.
When you talked about earlier in the presentation about being able to negotiate each of them individually, is this an area where it can be negotiated individually, whether they provide extra land or dedicate the park to the city rather than making it an HOA run one? Is this where staff would have that ability to, I guess, negotiate in these? Or?
Well, yeah, I think depends on the developers. The developers would, it's part of the, that discussion with the developers and whether they would be willing to provide the, agreement with the city so that we could utilize their facilities.
How would that work? If they want to give us a plot of good land for a library or something like that, in lieu of, we have that kind of discretion within these fee structures.
So part of any impact fee program is the inclusion of credits. So if a developer constructs, dedicates anything that is included in the study, they should receive a credit against their fees for that. So for example, in the north, we don't have a land component, so dedicating land wouldn't necessarily trigger a credit, but if they said, here's a park that is now a public park, then they would be required to receive.
Why is the land component not a part of it in such a growing area?
So in the north, to limit the fee increases, we did not include a land component because the city purchased a site up there.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay. But you could in the central or the lower?
Correct.
Okay, that makes sense, thank you.
So here's our comparison with our other cities. So again, we're definitely not the highest at this point. So you can see the difference. The south of it is a little bit higher in the fee component, but as a percent increase, it's less over the previous year. But you can see Gilbert, Chandler, they both have a lot higher impact fees than what we currently have. And then we're kind of leveling out with the rest of the valley as it relates to what our current fee structure is.
Are we going to have a slide at the end that kind of adds up all these?
Yes. Yes, we do.
What the entry, just the cost of doing business, to do business in Buckeye,
Yes.
the floor? Okay, thanks.
All right, so next up we have streets. So your current street fee includes one component. It's meant to acquire right-of-way along I-10 and future interchanges. That way, nothing develops where you want to put a future interchange. So we still have that component, but we also included a new component for arterials. So basically, if you're north of the river, up to, I believe it's Greenway, you're within the street service area. If you are between Greenway and, I think it's Glendale, because you're so far north, there is a 50% trip reduction factor. Essentially, the argument here is that, if you're that far north, you can come south to I-10, which you would need to use an interchange along I-10, or you can follow Sun Valley Parkway around to Surprise. So we've provided a 50% trip reduction to account for those additional ways of travel. If you are east of 85, south of 10, north of the river, that is the new arterial service area. So within that area, we are including a proposed fee to add additional arterials. So essentially, in areas where you have scalloped streets and no future development would be required to provide that half-street improvement, we're looking to use impact fees to add capacity in those bottlenecks. So I believe Watson and Miller at the canal, that's a really good example. So there's no future development that would ever be required to widen those bridges. So there's no outside mechanism for you to have someone fund that other than the city paying for it outright, or having future development through an impact fee pay for part of that. So with these, with the arterial component, it's a plan-based component. We say that future development, yes, they will benefit, but also existing development will benefit. So we're allocating the cost of these over all development in the arterial service area in 2034, the final year of the projection timeline. And that way, the city and future development will fund their proportionate share of adding capacity. And essentially, we're looking at these north-south thoroughfares, moving vehicles towards I-10, and that's why we're not looking at the west side of 85, because really we're just trying to build out the grid in this part of Buckeye, and recognizing that future development will place additional strains on your scalloped arterial grid. So this is really meant to just add capacity where 5-10 years from now there'll be some pretty serious choke points if everyone is still trying to cross a two-lane bridge.
So it does contribute to the scallop?
It's meant to fix
To help.
some specific scallops.
Okay.
Correct.
Thought that's what you were saying, I just wanted to make sure I walked away hearing that. And the 85, is that included in any of this? I heard you say Miller and Watson and the 10, but I didn't hear anything about the
So
85.
the service area is east of 85 and south of 10, but the actual roads is essentially Miller, Watson, 249th Apache Road. It's in the study, but we've looked at 6 specific projects.
Is it because it's not our road, or is it because we figure that's like a 10-year out problem, or what was the reason?
With this one, it's specifically because it's adjacent to some sort of parcel that either is a county island, so something already exists, so that development would not be required because it's already developed. It's not within the city, or it's adjacent to a canal. So essentially, just looking at areas where specifically no future development would be required to provide a hazard improvement. in areas that, you might want some additional lanes right now, but it's adjacent to a vacant parcel that will develop. We didn't include any of those projects because at some point in the future, when that parcel develops, that developer would be required to provide those hazard improvements. All right, so this just shows the proposed fees. So at the top, just so all of this can be shown with the same slide, we've got the proposed fees current in the middle. So in the middle, they're all the same because you only have one service area currently. And then at the bottom, that shows the difference. But if you look closely, you can see the fee for the arterial service area, which is south of 10, east of 85. You can see for the street service area, which is sort of the remainder of that light green area. And the trip reduction is north of Glendale, where they're essentially just paying for they get a trip reduction for the right-of-way acquisition along I-10.
So Councilmember Hagestad, we got 2 more slides, and then we'll start getting to your comparisons. So this is comparison just for streets. So you can see we're at the far end compared to other cities. So it is new. There's a large percent increase when you compare it to the previous year or previous study. But in comparison to the other cities, we are by far, on the lower end. And talking with Doug, Goodyear basically allocates some of their sales tax as it relates to and applies it towards streets. So that's why you don't see anything from Goodyear, because they have a different revenue stream that they provide for the streets. This is a summary. Like Ryan said, I do like numbers, but even this one is a little bit small for me. So I'm just going to jump to the graph. So this is the total of all non-utilities. So you can see as a comparison where we are as it falls with the other cities. So the green is the south. You can see the south and the north. So again, we're falling kind of in the middle of the group with the rest compared to the rest of the cities. So total-wise for non-utilities, we feel we're pretty in line with our neighboring communities. They are large percent increases overall when you compare it to what we're currently being paid. But compared to other cities, we're right in the middle of everyone else, or lower than a lot of the cities.
And just to add on to that, what we're seeing is as each city updates, they move sort of higher up in the list, and it's because costs have increased. Goodyear is sort of offsetting this because they use their excess construction sales tax to wipe out their street fee. Surprise doesn't have a street fee, so they're towards the lower end. But Phoenix and Glendale, they're updating their fees right now. So I'd be shocked if their fees didn't increase sometime next year when they update. So again, it's just everyone sort of moves up as they update the fees, and they're the newest one with the most up-to-date construction costs.
So this slide shows single-family residential. This one right here shows multifamily. This is per unit. So again, this kind of puts in line with a one single unit, which is as a percentage of the multifamily, it's about 75% of the reduction from the from the single family to multifamily. So we're in the kind of a little bit on the higher end in the comparison. But again, as you can see with a lot of these other cities, we're right in line with what the other cities are charging on a per unit basis for the multifamilies. This one right here is industrial. So this industrial changes now, goes to per 1,000 square feet. So we are on the lower, by far on the low end on this one. So again, this is just non-utilities. Here's commercial, a little bit higher, but again, we're still, I think as you can see overall, I think our non-utilities are pretty much in line with what a lot of the other cities are charging. So again, we're middle of the pack on this one, middle of the lower. And then the last one is office per 1,000. So we're kind of stuck, stayed right in the middle of the group overall. So any questions on the non-utilities before we jump into utilities?
So we talked about the changes to the utility methodology earlier, and really trying to better tie demand from high water users, generally the non-residential users, to the actual cost of those capital improvements. So with any meter in excess of 1.5 inches, we are shifting away from just a per meter calculation. As we mentioned earlier, we'll look at either master plan or a water demand study, and take those factors and apply it to the actual cost per gallon of capacity for water or sewer infrastructure. Again, Goodyear is currently doing this. Phoenix, it's sort of a hybrid in between this, where they are recognizing that the non-residential users generally have higher demand on a meter versus meter comparison. So again, just trying to better make the non-residential fees more proportionate to the actual demand. All right, so for water, we have two service areas. So there's Central, which is essentially anything between the river and I-10, essentially anything. There are a couple of areas that are carved out. And then there is Contessa West. So in Central, we've listed out the components, but essentially what we're doing here is just saying, hey, this is the cost of each component. This is the capacity related to it, and assigning a cost per gallon of capacity. For Contessa West, the current fees have a cost recovery, so essentially it's repaying the cost of well and transmission line, and so that will continue for the next 700 and something vacant lots in Contessa West, and then at that point, they would cease to receive any sort of cost recovery, but also they would need to provide water and sewer infrastructure because they would use up the existing capacity. So for Central, look at the next slide. You can see that at the top there is a cost per gallon associated with each component. So essentially what we're doing here is saying this is the capacity that we provide today, and this is the cost to construct that, and we take the sum of that. So in Central it's $22.56 per gallon, and then we just apply the master plan demand factors. So for a low density unit or single family unit, max day demand as defined by the master plan is 652 gallons per day. So the fee is just $22.56 times 652 gallons per day. And so you're, essentially the fee is doubling, but that reflects the cost increase that we've seen over the last 5 years.
I'm sorry to ask a question on this. This impact fee, right? Impact fee, correct, charged to new development going forward. And this would basically be transferred basically to each house, each rooftop. The builder would just pass it on. But you're saying the cost of the system, the sewer and the water treatment, but don't we already require them to to like a new, with the CFDs, don't we already require them to build the system and then turn it over to the city? Is this in lieu of that? Or is this in addition to that?
Well, so I'll take on the CFD part. So if they're going to use CFD funding, they would not be paying this at this point. So this is not really related to CFD funding. So this is central.
So it's an either or.
Right, so this is central, so most of the CFDs are north of 10, this is south of the 10, so this would be in this region, this area here. So a lot of this would be related to new development that's coming in, both residential and non-residential. And this is how that fee structure for that growth component of that infrastructure that needs to be added because new buildings, new homes are coming in, new businesses are coming in. It's that demand on the system.
Okay. So either a location where no CFD exists, or the developer builder decides not to use that funding mechanism.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
And if a developer decides to, build their own well, build their own transmission lines, things like that, they would get a credit against these fees. So if they realize that it's cheaper for them to construct it, then they can do that, and they receive a credit against the fees.
Thank you.
All right, so next up we have wastewater. So we're looking at 3 service areas. Central for wastewater is essentially east of 85 south of 10. There is some slight spillover. Then you have another service area, which is Sundance, and then Tartessa West. So Central and Sundance, we're showing all these components. And again, we look at the existing level of service, we look at the cost, and we come up with a fee based on that. Tartessa West is, again, a cost recovery. That's for their existing wastewater treatment facility. And, once they develop those remaining 700 and something lots, then this fee goes away, but they need to provide their own wastewater capacity if they want to expand. All right, so on the left side, we have the proposed fee for Central. On the right side is Sundance. And so you can just see that, the cost per gallon of capacity, varies for the most part between the 2 service areas. But, essentially it's just saying, hey, the cost per gallon times average day flow from different types of development gives us the fee. And so, you're seeing a bigger increase in Central than you are in Sundance. And part of that is, in Sundance, we don't currently provide, some of the components, so the fee is going to be proportionately lower. And so, we have talked with, master developers, stakeholders in this, and one of the changes we made in Central was, we said, okay, well, we actually have enough land for a future facility expansion, so we actually just removed that land component to reduce the fees some. So really just looking at including only what growth actually needs, and recognizing that in some areas, if you have enough of what you need, then we'll just go ahead and pull it out. You can revisit it in 3 to 5 years when you go through this process again if something changes. But really trying to identify any sort of cost savings where possible.
And I guess just to add is that, so you can see the meter sizes go up to 1.5 inches. Once it goes above 1.5 inches, then the calculation does change slightly. So we are using that 20, or in this case, the $43.49. So the calculation, and then it goes based on the reports that were provided, the engineering reports that are provided will be based on it as part of that calculation. So here is just the utility side comparison. So we combine water and wastewater in the slide. So in the green bar is basically on the far left is what our proposed fee is for the south. So as you can see, we're at the top end compared to the other cities. Again, I think as Ben pointed out earlier, the other cities, they're charging based on meter, or we're looking at by usage. So that's where the biggest change in these calculations, where they come from. The other part, some of the cities do collect a water resource fee, which we are not proposing at this point, at this time. The orange is the south region, it is less. But again, we're probably more in line, but that's primarily with Tartesso. In that area, I believe, is where that one is. So the focus probably would be on the south, is where most of the discussion will occur.
Bill, if I could just clarify one thing. Since this is a single-family residential, we are charging based on meter size just like everybody else. So there is no change in methodology here. The increase you're seeing in the south on the water side is purely based on just the cost of the infrastructure that's going into the ground. And on the Tartesso, you don't see a change because it's a reimbursement for something they've already done. So that's a set fee for what's already in the ground.
Summary, I think it's this, we'll just go into the next. So here are some of your examples that you were referring to. So this is a fee comparison. This is just for single family residential. So here's current fees, all fees. We would be paying $16,295. Where the proposed fees would go to $35,386. Or 117% increase overall. And so you can see we broke it down between the non-utilities at the top and the utilities at the bottom, and the percent increase over each. And then the far column on the right is the dollar increase over between current and proposed. Here's just the total fee, impact fees for the single family. So as you look, so this is both utilities and non-utilities. So as you look, you compare us to the other cities, we are at the top end when you add all the fees together for the Buckeye, for the south region. We would be the highest.
And that's just to maintain level of service. Or provide the same level of service for new areas that we provide in other service areas.
For the most part.
So this one is for multifamily. This is for 36 units. Again, it's the same layout. So proposed is $888,000 compared to $205,000 currently, which you can see the increase is 331%. Dollar change, $682. The one thing I have off on the left is that the cost per unit is $6,900. Total is $24,000. So it's basically, it's less than what a single family would be paying for their permit. So this is broken down by units.
And before you leave that one, this is where the new calculation for the water and the wastewater starts to come into play, and you can see that we're capturing the actual water impact of multifamily compared to the way it's being charged currently. Bill had mentioned earlier that a multifamily is typically about 75% less than what a single family is. By doing this, you actually end up with water and wastewater fees that are about 75% of what the single family residential would pay. So it's starting to really capture what their actual water usage is. In multifamily, just like any other, the industrial or commercial you're going to see, if they were to provide a water report that would show that they're going to use it less, the fee that they would pay would actually be less. but it's the water and wastewater. You can see here the percent change is 658%. So that's really what's driving it after we leave the single family residential.
So total impact fees, this comparison shows 252 units, so it's a significantly larger comparison. So you can see where for the number of units, you're just under $7 million for 252 units. But like Doug said, again, if it's above 1.5 meter, then there's different reports that can be provided, submitted, then the impact fee will be based on those new water reports or wastewater reports. Here's commercial at 123,000 square feet. Total is 2.6 million compared to 546. Again, it goes back to the utility component. We are looking at the calculation based on our current engineering standards, which is the max day usage. So again, if there is something that is a facility that comes in and uses less water and they have a report to support that, then these fees would be significantly less. It's not based on meter size like it was previously. So here's total impact fees for commercial for 123,000 square foot. So you can see where we compare with the other cities. So we are in the top end in our comparison. So this is industrial for 250,000 square foot building. Again, total impact fees 5.2 million compared to 138,000. So it really going to boil down in the utilities based on the report. The water usage is what it really will boil down to. So if they provide a report that supports less water usage and wastewater, then the fees will be less. If they're at the top end of the engineering standards, then this is the fees that would be calculated for a facility this size. So here's what we
ask a question on that one specifically.
Sure. Yes, ma'am.
And who is this?
So I don't know. So back on the industrial, the 250,000 per foot, that is heavily dependent on what the use is, I think. So if we're talking a 250,000 square foot distribution facility, they have very, very limited use, water use. And so I'm assuming that water fee and wastewater fee for that matter would be significantly less than what's shown on that spreadsheet.
That is correct.
Okay. We generally talk about those, and again, it depends on the number of employees, and there's so many factors in that we're talking. It could be a tenth of that number that's shown there for a 250,000 square foot building.
Correct.
Correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. 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 Thank you.
So the last one is an office for 47,000 square foot facility. Again, it's the same, $880,000 proposed versus $276,000 currently. Again, the big increase in this is in the water and wastewater component. Here's our comparison, not the highest, but definitely compared to the other cities, we are one of the highest. And so the last slide at this point is basically our project timeline. So today's work workshop. So currently, we're looking at October 1st to come back with a public hearing. And then at that point, November 5th would be the adoption of these land use assumptions and the infrastructure improvement plan, with the ultimate goal. Then April 7th would be the effective date for the development fees. So with that, Mayor and Vice Mayor, we'll answer any questions you might have.
Start on the left, Councilmember Eustace.
I don't have any questions at this time. Thank you, sir.
Councilmember Grant.
I just have a comment, because truthfully, you lost me about the third slide. All you have to do is look north of I-10, where we had CFDs and master plan communities, and see the developments up there, and look south of I-10, where we didn't have the will to stick to our guns and charge adequate impact fees, or we let developments come in because I guess we were worried that no one would come here and see our scallop streets, our water, whatever. I mean, we're driving it every day, stoplights, whatever. So we just have to have the will to say these are necessary for a growing community. And I think we're going to, my only other comment is we're going to regret lowering the parks and library fees in the future. That's it.
Councilmember Huff.
So Bill, with the last 9 years of impact fees, how did we do?
Well, kind of loaded question there. So I guess as it relates, one thing is that we collect the fees, they're based at a certain point in time, especially now with the cost of infrastructure. I think we did well. The projections are lower than what we anticipated, but the cost of the infrastructure has just increased so much, is that the money that we have collected is only paying for a portion of the facilities that we're trying to construct. So I think there's two components in that. We appear to be collecting less than what our original projections were, but the other part is that the money just isn't going as far as what we anticipated. That's how I would answer that question.
No, that's fair. I think it's just, we always sit here and negotiate and we go a little bit lower, and at the end of the day, we didn't collect enough. And now the residents are suffering a bit. So I just want to give context to that, I guess, and find out. And I know nobody could have predicted 2019 through now. I understand that. But that's not to say that it can't continue or that it won't. I'm not sure. Do we have I'm not going to go there. And this is probably more just a philosophical question, just throwing it out there. Is there any city that has just said, blanketed, everybody gets the same fee, we're just going to take everything that costs this and it's spread evenly? Does anybody ever do that? Because I feel like we're, in a little bit of a way, encouraging industries that we may or may not want to encourage, or maybe we're discouraging others, and we're picking winners and losers based off of our fees rather than just leveling the playing field, maybe excluding water and wastewater, but at least leveling the field for the other fees. I was just curious if anybody has ever done the fees that way. Whereas whether, you brought in one resident or you brought in 20, it's based off of something different. I'm just kind of curious. That way we're not discouraging a certain industry and encouraging others. I'm not sure that gets answered here. I wanted to throw it out there because when I see some of the, we're way up here on certain things and way down there, I'm like, well, then why wouldn't I just take my land and go do that instead of going and doing this? And yet that might hurt us because fees are so high and for one industry. So if you have an answer, great. If not, I think it's something that perhaps we at least need to ask ourselves at some point, do we want to encourage industry?
I'm sorry, I'm going to jump in before
Yeah, please.
we have an expert down here to tell you what other cities are doing.
Yeah.
But really, the fees are trying to represent the proportionate impact on the infrastructure that their development is having. So the city is really not picking winners or losers. The demand on our infrastructure is driving those fees. So it's really the intensity of those uses times the cost of the infrastructure to support them and maintain our level of service that's, the calculation is the calculation.
So this is the only calculation and method that's used. And that was where I started. I didn't know if there was a different way or didn't.
So maybe that.
I was just curious about the approach.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can vary the demand factors, but, we have to be able to justify those demand factors. If the city were, so if we just said, hey, this is what we're gonna charge, it's gonna be the same for everyone, then we would definitely be overcharging some types of development, undercharging others. It becomes an equal protection issue, and you'd be sued pretty quickly.
So nobody else does.
Yeah, so that's why we,
That's what I
we have a cost per person, and so then we can say, well, based on different occupancy factors, this is what you should charge, because we're saying it's, per person or, per job. So it's a way to really, quantify the demand from different types of development. And then to get to your other point, why wouldn't I just, develop over here? I mean, there are many reasons why people choose to develop anywhere, but there are also reasons why people choose specifically Buckeye, and the impact fee is a way to at least maintain a level of service. That way, you don't have declining infrastructure standards, because the level of infrastructure you provide does attract or repel different types of development. So that's why some cities can have higher fees than others, because maybe they provide a higher level of service, and the resident is ultimately willing to pay a little bit more to be in that city, because they provide that type of amenity.
That didn't mean your time was up.
Not a timer.
There was more to that answer.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, again, the fees are different from each city, but you do start to see sort of a trend where they're generally falling within, a range, at least on the non-utility side, where everyone is providing a somewhat similar level of service, and everyone has somewhat similar costs. So it really comes down to, what are we including in a fee? And with these comparisons, it's sort of hard to get a true apples-to-apples comparison, because, maybe someone else's park fee, they're just paying off some debt from something they built 10 years ago, and costs are much lower on that. But maybe in a growing area, they need land, they need the pools, they need a lot of different components. So it's hard to truly get a good comparison, because every city can include many different components within their fees.
Councilmember Hagestad?
You probably covered this and I missed it, but in order to get from here to there, you're not going to collect enough impact fees in year 1, 2, or 3 probably to start building something that you need. So in order to get from here to where you need to be, there's some sort of inflation mechanism in there that you're assuming. Did you cover that? Do we know what assumption you used for inflation?
So we don't include inflation, or we try to limit it severely, because if the cost we use is different than the actual cost by more than 10%, you are required to refund that excess. So if we said, hey, we think it's going to be, 500,000, and it really only cost us 300,000. Well, because that's more than a 10% difference in cost, you'll be required to refund that to the fee payer. So we try to take a more conservative approach and saying, if costs increase or development increases beyond what we're showing in the study, then go ahead and update.
Do another study.
Right.
Otherwise the city's eating the difference.
Right.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Councilmember Walker?
Maybe I missed it at some point earlier in the conversation. The southern part was not really contemplated in some of the maps. Why did we do that?
Due to infrastructure availability. So, if you as a city are going to build some parks, you're talking south of the river, correct?
No, I'm talking south of rural.
Oh, yeah. So, can you ask your question again?
I can answer that question. As you get down south there's no specific ongoing development that they're aware of, so everything would basically be happening case by case as we're doing it. So we would be entering into a development agreement with somebody. There's no ability for us to really predict what's going to happen in there, and a lot of this is based on assumptions and predicting what kind of growth is going to happen.
Okay, because it's so far out at this point, we can't contemplate because we just don't know.
Exactly.
There's only a couple of really, mostly industrial things happening down there, so we don't know what's going to go from there.
Exactly.
Okay, that explains it. Thank you.
These increases are pretty dramatic. Are we on the front end of this study trend with the comparison cities? So as they complete their studies, are we going to see similar increases?
I think that's kind of hard to predict, but that's what it appears that's happening, like at least in some of the cities.
So we're just on the front end of...
I think Phoenix, we'll see where Phoenix ends up, but a lot of the other cities, Surprise is done, Goodyear is done. So, there are some of those cities that are close to us that their study is done. So, we could do a comparison of each of the categories just, in our neighboring cities. That's for sure. The ones that we know that have been completed within the last, 12 months, we could do that. So, but there's only a few that appear to be upcoming that could potentially jump us at this point.
Yeah, no, it was just an observation from the numbers. And the other thing that popped at me is we're primed for a lot of this growth. Look at our neighbors to the east in Goodyear and Avondale, and Surprise and Peoria. They're relatively built out more than we are. So we're going to see more growth, and extrapolate that into a higher impact on these services, and those fees need to reflect that. So good. I think it was good information. I appreciate that. So Mayor, any questions?
Yeah, so I agree. Great information, and I know there's a mountain of work that goes into putting this together. So good on you guys for getting it done. I know there's a lot of stakeholders that are participating, and I want to thank them for doing the same. One question is the water resource fee. You mentioned that that's not part of this. What are we contemplating for that moving forward?
Everybody's looking at
it. Almost made it through. And maybe that's a conversation for another time. But that is a big deal moving forward, and there's no clearer impact fee that the development community can be paying into than a water resource fee that gives us the revenues to purchase water for that growth that's coming at us. And then Vice Mayor, you hit on it a little bit too. I was thinking of the streets, and Goodyear's is significantly less than ours. Some of that is I'm sure, and we have an insider from them who's sitting at the table there who can talk a bit to it. Some of it may be just paying for that out of the general fund, and some of it is, as I'm just sitting here thinking through the different roadways that they have, from freeway south and generally from freeway north, those arterial roads are in a much more complete condition than the majority of our roads. So I'm assuming that from a street perspective, that has quite a bit to do with it, just the maturity of the growth that they have going on there. And just a couple of eyes wide open type things to consider for council. One is, I think I heard that we are not including parcels in this plan or frontage for parcels. Let's talk about streets specifically. And a case might be Miller Road, for instance. We could collect impact fees and build out all of Miller Road, but I don't think that's the intent. When you have parcels that have planned development and they have the requirement to build their half-street improvements. So I guess this is a question just to confirm. We're not talking about impact fees being collected to pay for instance, the north side of Broadway, east side of Miller Road where Nirvana goes, or the next area up north of the canal to pay for roadway improvements there. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so there's a prescribed location for and plan that's been developed for impact fees, and I want to make sure we go into this eyes wide open and understand from a council perspective, this is going to start to take care of some of those bigger regional in-between type infrastructure pieces, but it's not going to solve all of Miller Road issues in the near term. And then similarly, there's quite a few locations, and Councilmember Buckeye had mentioned it, and I thought, yep, you're spot on with it, regarding CFDs, and the CFDs have built out infrastructure really well, but there are quite a few areas on both the north and south sides of I-10 where you have CFDs, and they don't quite go far enough. When you look at Jackrabbit Trail or Indian School east of Jackrabbit Trail, or McDowell Road, or the stuff that is impacted by the new development that's coming in, it's that issue persists everywhere, and we're going to get hit with it on every single road. It's hard to get out in front of all of the development and encapsulate the cost for all of the projects into the CFDs, or with some exaction on the developers moving forward. I'd love to see that we would have more monies for those much bigger regional type projects, the traffic interchanges, because I think we have Dean Road that's sitting unfunded still and probably just not get any payment from the impact fees. I have not gone through to confirm that. I'm assuming Johnson Road is the same way. There's probably other regional traffic interchange type developments that could use quite a bit of work that got funded through this also. So anyway, just while this is a great finance mechanism for the city, there's a lot that's not funded in it, and this isn't going to get us out of the pickle that we're in with infrastructure development. Vice Mayor, that's all I have.
Can you repeat that? We had you on mute.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Sorry, that was a run-on sentence.
Yeah, there's punctuation in there somewhere. Any other questions? I know, Mr. McCoy, I'm assuming you're taking a vig on all of this because your department continues to grow.
I apologize. Sure.
Any other questions? With that, we're adjourned. We'll be back at 6 o'clock.